Back on this Football Friday edition of Get Up, and Aaron Rodgers' future in Green Bay continues to be the topic of conversation across the league. Yesterday, former Packer running back Ahman Green was on KJZ on ESPN Radio, sharing an interesting perspective on the Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst. Here's what he said.
I said, hey, bro, you got to be honest. Me and him, we crossed paths when I was a few years ago. I was trying to get into the NFL in terms of scouting. I had a conversation with him myself personally, and I remember doing an interview with him. They said, oh, well, you have a little bit too much experience. And I'm like, huh? I was like, well, wouldn't you want somebody like that on the staff? It's just be honest. That was not an honest answer. So he needs to be real. He needs to learn from this situation by being honest with his players.
So communication maybe is an issue here, and all of this, of course, is interesting because of the way it may or may not affect and inform the situation with Aaron Rodgers. Dan Graziano, you've been close to this. What is your sense?
Well, I think there is a sense that there might be a communication issue, personality conflict, if you will, between Aaron Rodgers and the GM, Brian Gutekunst. And Gutekunst said after the draft, this most recent draft, that he probably should have communicated better with Aaron Rodgers last year when they drafted Jordan Love in the first round. But yeah, I don't think that's the biggest deal here. Look, Brian Gutekunst is not an outsider who came in to run the Packers a couple of years ago. He rose through the ranks there and was a Ted Thompson assistant who took over when Thompson stepped down. He's entering his 23rd season with the Packers. Like, the Packers operate a certain way, and Gutekunst is kind of continuing that. And it may be that Aaron Rodgers is just sort of annoyed that he's not the guy for whom the Packers will make an exception. So, yeah, communication is part of the issue, sure. But look, I just think at this point it's a conflict of personality between Rodgers and the GM, and I'm curious to see if that can be overcome. Packers can throw money at him. The Packers can convince him that they offer the best chance for him to win the Super Bowl, which is probably true, versus other potential destinations. But it's a question of whether Aaron decides he wants to go back to work for this guy. That could be a tricky thing to overcome.
That's so interesting to me. Let's focus in on that part. This is about the Packers' way, the way they do business, and the question of whether or not you make an exception to that for someone who is exceptional, like Aaron Rodgers. And I've got an executive and I've got a player, so that's the perfect people to ask. Mike T, I'll ask you. I mean, there is the Patriot way, the Packer way, and then there are these special individuals. Should an organization change the way it does business, make exceptions, if you will, for someone exceptional like Aaron Rodgers?
Absolutely. Production equals tolerance. And Aaron Rodgers has earned the right to be treated differently. He's an all-time great. And Brian Gutekunst is a good GM whose finest moment certainly wasn't last year, the way he handled things with Aaron Rodgers. With that said, he has to go fix things and make sure that Aaron Rodgers wants to be there, finish his career there, talk about his legacy. But absolutely, he has earned the right to be treated differently because he's just better than everybody else. That's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and again, having been there now 16 years, it's fascinating to me. Bart, from a player's perspective, I'm dying to hear what you think.
Yeah. I mean, you have to understand, Brian Biller used to say this all the time. I'll treat you guys fairly, not the same. Understand there's different rules for different people because there's different value and importance within the organization. It's all about how much skin you got in the game and how much you've done and how much you've accomplished in that uniform. And Aaron Rodgers has accomplished a lot in that uniform, and he deserved the respect. And I think it's about respect. And Mike T understands this, right? Because Aaron Rodgers, when you talk about somebody that gets promoted up through the ranks, not everybody's on board with his ability or the reason why he got his position. And when some people see him as a general manager, Aaron Rodgers may see him as the same person that he was 13 years ago when Aaron Rodgers came into the league. So it's hard to adjust to that sometimes. I can remember, having to adjust to Mike Pettin being the boss and being the defensive coordinator when I'm used to him being the guy that was up in the booth filming practice, right? So it's a level of respect, and I think Aaron Rodgers probably wanted a different level of respect because he's respecting that he earned his spot and where he came from, and both of them kind of did that, right? And he felt like, hey, man, you could at least gave me the heads up. We should have a better relationship than this because we've been around each other for so long. This isn't an outsider coming in making rules. This is an insider that's coming in that knows the sacrifice, know what I went through dealing with the Brett Favre situation, know what I've done and what I've had to fight against as this organization tries to get back to the promised land, which I've taken them there already once in my career.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, but I think the bigger picture, I mean, you're right, but I just think the Packers are very set in their ways as an organization, and they have a history of this. I heard Matt Hasselbeck talk about this on Adam Schefter's podcast. You know, Reggie White finished his career elsewhere. Brett Favre finished his career elsewhere. These are legendary Hall of Fame caliber players with the Packers that the organization decided at some point, you don't fit here anymore. We have a long-term plan. Brian Gutekunst is not going anywhere. He's going to be there longer than Aaron Rodgers is, whether Rodgers likes it or not. And the Packers are going to continue to operate a certain way, whether Rodgers likes it or not. So the question becomes, can he make his peace with that and find a way back?
Go ahead, Bart.
See, but none of those players were coming off of an MVP caliber season. That's the difference. Reggie White came there late in his career and finished his career, and it was time for him to move on. Aaron Rodgers is playing at the top of his game, and they brought in his replacement far too early before he was ready to move on. And now we're talking about, okay, let's lock Aaron Rodgers up for good. Well, we're going to lock Aaron Rodgers up for good for the rest of his career. That means that Jordan Love never plays. So then what was the point? That could have been somebody brought in to help me win a championship. But you guys are trying to tell me that I have a shelf life once you move up aggressively to get a quarterback to be my future replacement.
Go ahead, Dan.
They also brought in Brett Favre's replacement before he was ready to go. What was that guy's name again?
Yeah, that was Aaron.
What happened to him?
Aaron Rodgers. You get him how you lose him. I get that. No, I understand all that, but this is a different situation because now players play a lot longer, and Brett Favre had been flirting with retirement for years and talking about retiring. And every offseason there was a saga about, was Brett Favre going to play? Was he going to retire? And he was holding the organization hostage. This was an opportunity to move forward and play it forward. Aaron Rodgers is 5 years still left in his career. That means Jordan Love never played, so that means that they chose wrong. And then he proved himself right by having an MVP caliber season. And now they're caught with a mess. And now they're going to have a bad environment in the locker room where they should be a team that we're talking about contending for a Super Bowl. We don't even know if Aaron Rodgers is ever going to take the field or he's going to be asking us who, where, what, and why on Jeopardy.
Mike T, yes, it's the most unique leverage in the history of this or any sport. Mike T, just to get a final thought from you. The idea, the Packer way, it feels to me, and this is an argument Dan Graziano and I've had a million times, seems to be to always have one eye on the future. And the question is, while that works, they win a lot of games. The question is, can you win in the present if you are always keeping an eye on the future? I think that's what Rodgers might be looking at. He's looking at Brady with a team that has completely mortgaged its future in order to try and maximize its present. Do you think that's a concern? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do both. You can win for today and develop for tomorrow. Look, they got to the championship game last year. They were really close. Now, you could argue they should not have traded up for Jordan Love. He could have been there later in the first round, maybe the second. So absolutely. But I think ultimately the Packer way, we can respect that. But the here and the now is, as Bart says, you have a championship level quarterback who's playing great. You could support him and still draft. Look what Tampa Bay did. They brought everyone back, and they still drafted a quarterback in the second round. They're preparing for their future with Kyle Trask. You can do both, but you have to communicate it, and you have to execute it flawlessly. And you could certainly argue that they could have taken a receiver last year in the first round and come back and still get in a quarterback in the second round.
All right, it's a point well made. Let me leave it there for the moment. We'll do more on this as we continue. In the meantime, it is time now for Get Your Eyes Checked, brought to you by America's Best Contacts and Eyeglasses. And here's the moment for you. This is Xander Bogaerts going for a fly ball, and then just take a look at what happens here. We got up, and it's down, and he's down, and everybody's down. Both the ball and Bogaerts end up further away than expected, and believe it or not, a pop-up to